A dreadful accident has happened at Flannan's. My arrival there this afternoon has shown a most grave scene. I fired a rocket, but no response was made. The clocks were stopped. The kitchen was disturbed. Other signs indicate that the incident must have happened about a week ago. Those poor fellows. Night is coming on, and I will wait here and I will search for answers. I will await your advice and guidance on the matter. I cannot understand what must have occurred here, and I only hope that you can make sense of this. Welcome to Extraordinary Stories Podcast. Hey, how are you? Are you well? Are you good? I am. So here we are, episode 37. Now let's just talk about this episode because I've chosen to work under a particular theme, which is Scottish mysteries, bizarre Scottish events. Now, I don't consider myself to be a particularly Scottish. I'm not one of these ones that's like, I'm a proud Scotsman. That's just not really ever been me. I don't ever really think that about myself. I like being Scottish, but I don't ever, I'm not one of these sort of, I'm going to bash on about it. But there has been a lot of chat around the podcast, and I'm getting a lot of stuff that's just been about Scottishness recently, and I thought, well, you know what? Embrace it. Just fucking embrace it. Go with it. So the 3 stories that I've got for you, they're all Scottish, they're all extraordinary, they're all concerning disappearances, and in some cases, just the absolutely outright weird. And we can sack that bollocks because that just does my head in. Hate the bagpipes, absolutely hate them. So, shout outs for this episode. Shout out number 1 goes to Kevin Earp in Australia. Hey Kevin, thanks for getting in touch. Thanks for joining the group. Thanks for letting me know what you think about the podcast. That's amazing. Thank you. Sarah Skilling, hello. Katia Tilk, hello. And Abby Schofield. Just wanted to say hello to all of you. If you are someone who has just recently joined the group, then hello and welcome. I'm doing my best to say hello to everybody as best I possibly can, but people are joining the group and people are listening to the podcast in such high numbers now that if I don't get to you, please don't take it personally. It's just that so many people are joining the group, so many people are listening, and I'm trying to get to everybody. So, but I know that I appreciate it. Know that in my heart, I'm delighted to have you listening, have you liking the Facebook page, and have you along for the ride. That is Extraordinary Stories. Okay, I can hear you thinking this is all well and good, but get on with the stories, and that's exactly what I will do. So, are you ready? Okay, let's go. Story 1. The Lighthouse Disappearances. The island of Ailenmore is just under a quarter of a mile in width. The island, it sits apart from a series of tiny little islands that make up the Flannan Islands in the Outer Hebrides at the very, very top of Scotland. The island of Ailenmore is 60 miles away from the mainland Scotland, and it sits surrounded by the Northern Sea. The island has only one thing on it: a lighthouse. There are no inhabitants of this tiny little island. The cliffs on either side drop 200 feet into the sea, and the island dips at the south side, and it exposes it really dangerously to the sea. So it was decided in the early 1900s by the Lighthouse Board that this island would be perfect to have a lighthouse on, and the construction began. Steps were built up into the island, and it took a full year, but the lighthouse was built. I love a lighthouse. I don't know how you feel about a lighthouse. I absolutely love them. I think they're just, obviously they're amazing to look at. They're iconic. They're fantastic. I also think part of it comes from, I had years and years and years ago, I had a brilliant teacher who once said to me, and I've never ever forgotten this advice. He said to me, see when everything else is just going mad, see when you feel like there's too many things going on and there's too much happening and you're chaotic and this is coming at you and that's coming at you, just keep the lighthouse in sight. Because if you can just keep the lighthouse in sight, then you know what you're swimming towards. And I think that's really good advice. I think that's really good life advice. And actually, it's one of those ones, you could put that on a meme. You could put that on a fucking Facebook post and it sounds cheesy. But actually, I think there's something in that that's really true. If you can just keep the lighthouse, whatever your lighthouse is, in sight, then, you're always going to be guided by that. For so long, I've tried to, get a lighthouse tattoo. I really wanted one. Here's the issue. They always just end up looking phallic. They just end up looking like a big dick on your arm. That is the problem. They never ever look great unless you get I'm actually, as we're doing this, I'm penciling my own arm. Unless you got a lighthouse and then you surrounded it by lots of rocks and lots of sea, but that's that's going to end up becoming an absolutely huge, massive tattoo. That's not what I wanted. I just wanted a beautiful kind of lighthouse, but it just looks phallic. Anyway, sorry, I've wandered off the topic, but anyway, lighthouses is what we need to be thinking about. So the other thing to be built on the island was just a very small living quarters for the lighthouse keepers. A very, very, very small property. In actual fact, the lighthouse keepers who worked on this island, they spent very little time in that, because in the base of the lighthouse was their real quarters. The other space that was built was I suppose it was a kind of breakout space. It was somewhere you could get away from the people you were working with, even though the island's tiny and you're probably only walking a couple of 100 yards. At least you're in a different space. So there were a team of 4 men employed to work on this new lighthouse, and how it worked is that 3 of the men would be stationed there for 2 weeks at a time, and one of the men would get 2 weeks off of the island to go to the mainland and have fun, recuperate, live their life, and then it would be a sort of swap in, swap out system. Okay, so no man was ever left for too long, because someone would always come in after 2 weeks, relieve you of your job, and they would go do their thing, and then after 2 weeks they would be refreshed, they would be ready, kind of like a 2-week holiday. They would come back and be ready. So at any given time, 3 men were on that island and 1 was elsewhere. I mean, I think it's possible to romanticise the idea of what being a lighthouse keeper must be. You know, like I think about it and I think, oh, the solitude must be lovely. The hours of time that you get to yourself. You can read, you can paint, you can do all these things. Actually, I think the truth of it is, I think it must be quite a lonely job, quite a horrible job. You're dealing with tough weather climates. You're dealing with long hours and loneliness. Even though there's 3 of you, you're still dealing with all of that. Okay, let's introduce the 3 players in this story that we need to know about straight away. So Mr. James Dupac. James was the most senior of all the lighthouse keepers. He'd been a lighthouse keeper elsewhere for 20 years. He was married and he had 4 children. Great fact here. When this new lighthouse, the one on Island Moor, the one I'm talking about, was built, he spent 14 months living on the island in a tiny, ramshackle hut just to acclimatise himself to the conditions, so that when he would eventually lead a team of lighthouse keepers, he would be in the best physical shape and he would know what to do when the weather conditions were bad. I mean, that is dedication to your job. 14 months on an island, no bigger than a postage stamp. Wow, fuck me, that is great. So he was the most senior of all the lighthouse keepers. Next, Mr. Thomas Marshall. He was the assistant lighthouse keeper. He was 28 years old and unmarried. Now I can understand at the time, okay, so we're sort of 1900, 28, you're unmarried, maybe you would think of taking that kind of job. Was it the right choice of job for a 28-year-old unmarried man? I don't know. I question that. I mean, it's different times, but I think to myself, go out and party, mate. Go and get, you know what I mean? Go and get a job where you're actually you're not married. You've not got, you know what I mean? You've not got kids. Why are you taking a job where you isolate yourself and you spend the year round with only 2 other guys on an island? I don't know. Anyway, that's my own personal feeling on it. The third person we need to know about is Donald MacArthur. Donald was 40. He was also a very experienced lighthouse keeper. He was unmarried. The fourth and the final person, and this is the most important, Joseph Moore. Joseph is going to become really important in the story as it goes on. Okay, so let's recap. It's 1900. And on the island, we've got James, we've got Thomas, and we've got Donald. And they've been working solidly for months. But our other man, Joseph, he's been coming to, swap in, swap out. So the men have all had their kind of 2 weeks off or 2 weeks rest. And when they arrive to offer that rest to the men on the island, they arrive on what is known as the relief ship. So this ship would come to the island to relieve the person who was getting their 2 week break, but it would also bring food, water, supplies, sometimes fresh clothing, new blankets. So this ship was really important when it arrived every 2 weeks because it contained things that the men who were working at the lighthouse, they really needed. Around about the time when this story takes place, Joseph Moore was the man who was coming to relieve the other lighthouse keepers on the relief ship, but the relief ship was late. It was late by 2 days, and that was due to bad weather. Bad weather meant that the ship couldn't travel. And this meant that the 3 lighthouse keepers, who were keenly waiting on that ship's arrival, were extremely low on supplies of food, and at that point they were just desperate for the ship to arrive. I mean, I can only imagine you must be going out of your mind waiting for that ship. If you know it's coming and you know it's got food and you know it's going to bring those things, if it's 2 days late, that must be just the most frustrating feeling. You must just get so impatient waiting for it. So, eventually, bad weather over, Joseph Moore, he's steering the ship towards the island, and he looks ahead and he starts to notice something odd. It was the dead of night, and there was no light coming from the lighthouse. And at first he thinks, perhaps it's mist or fog or something is clouding his eyes. But as he gets closer, he becomes absolutely sure he can see no light. So in the relief ship, normally pulled in to the island, they would signal their arrival with the use of horns, and this was to let the lighthouse keepers know that they had arrived. And so Joseph is beeping the horn, but there's nothing. There's no response. He sees absolutely no sign of life. He sees no movement. So he starts to panic. He starts to worry. The combination of the fact that he's seeing no movement and the light not being on, he takes one of the flares and he fires it into the sky. And this is to let the men know that the relief boat has arrived. No response to the flare. So now he's really panicked. So he draws the boat up to the edge of the island and he gets out as fast as he possibly can. And he immediately scrambles towards the lighthouse, only to discover that the gates around the lighthouse are closed. This wasn't normal. The gates were never closed. So he climbs the gate. He scales his way over it and he gets to the entrance door. There's no one there to greet him. There's no one coming to the door to meet him. The door is also closed and locked. So not being able to get in, he runs round to the other side where he knows the back door is. The back door is also locked. By now he's in real panic mode. Something is wrong. The gates should not be closed. These 2 doors should not be locked. And eventually he's running round and he's pulling at the doors and he finds one door that is open, and it's the kitchen door. So he goes inside. On entering the kitchen, he looks at the fire and he immediately realises the fire has not been lit for several days. He looks at the pile of logs next to the fire and he knows straight away this fire has not been used in days. On the table there are plates with food, and then he knows something is really wrong. The men would not leave food lying on the table. So he runs into the bedrooms. The bedrooms are empty. The beds are unmade. Again, just another odd sign. In the house there were a series of clocks. Now obviously being lighthouse keepers, they needed to have lots of clocks and they always needed to be accurate. All of the clocks were stopped. All stopped at the exact same time. 9:16. Joseph said later, "I did not take time to search further, for I knew in this moment something serious had occurred." So he runs outside. He climbs back over that locked gate, back to the relief ship. And to the men who were also on that ship, he says to them, something is wrong. The 3 lighthouse keepers are not inside. I can't find them anywhere. So the men on the relief ship, they say, okay, what we'll do is we will go back to the mainland and we will report that something has happened. Something has gone amiss here. So Joseph, he decides that he is going to stay on the island that night. He's going to stay in the lighthouse. I can only imagine that must have been horrible. That's a bit like a house where there's been a terrible crime, a terrible murder, and being like, yeah, I'll be the one person who chooses to stay overnight where there's been a terrible crime. But anyway, so good on Joseph for deciding that he was going to do that. So the ship gets back to land and the major lighthouse board are contacted. A telegraph is sent with the words, "A terrible incident has happened at Eilean Moor. Help is needed." Immediately when this is reported, the idea begins to spread that something terrible and tragic has happened to the 3 men. Either the bad weather, the wind has blown all 3 men over the edge of the island, or has something far more sinister happened on that tiny island. There was a warning in the telegraph that was sent. It said, there are strange signs inside the lighthouse, and at this moment they cannot be explained. But an investigation will take place into these mysterious clues. The following morning, the sun rises and a team of men arrive to search the island. Remember, I told you it's tiny. It's 1/4 of a mile long. It's a really small island. But a team of men, they search high and low to see what they could find of the 3 missing men. Nothing. Not a trace. The search continued for 2 full days. The house, the island, the sea all around, everywhere was searched. This is now becoming an incredibly frustrating investigation because nothing is showing up. And of course, the families of these men, they want answers. They want answers to where the men have gone. Also, there's now big interest in the story. So, here's what happens next. An investigator called Moorhead is brought onto the island. He's a kind of detective sort. Picture him as you will. At first, my first image was Sherlock Holmes, and then I was like, nah, that's totally wrong. 1900s, trying to think what he would have looked like. I imagine he was probably wearing some sort of long, dark Mac type affair. Probably some police hat of a kind with a small notebook writing down his notes. So, he's essentially, in a way, kind of the most important person in this investigation, because he's the person who is there to really investigate and report on what has actually happened. Well, he combs the island for signs, any sign that he can find, but he doesn't really find anything, and that is just frustrating. So he goes to the logbooks. Now, the logbooks were kept meticulously by every lighthouse keeper, and they recorded everything. They recorded all sorts of lighthouse things. I don't know, I'm not a lighthouse keeper, so I don't know what they recorded. But, I put the light on, I boiled some water, I put the light off. I'm taking the piss. Obviously, it's not in that detail. But these logbooks were very, very, very important. Of course they were. And also, interestingly, I didn't know this until, I'm going to tell you this fact in a second. I didn't know that the logbooks also, as well as documenting, we saw a ship here and the light went on at this point and all of that sort of stuff, they also document what was kind of happening between the men who were sharing the lighthouse. So they can often use these books, they weren't books, they were writing on a bit of slate, but they can also use these slate to talk about their fellow lighthouse keepers. So they can say, so-and-so ate lunch at blah 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 time, and this person did it. I mean, they were really detailed, they were there for a good reason. They were there to kind of note everything down. But what Moorhead noticed is that the notes had stopped a few days before the disappearances, and the final entries were bizarre. James, who, if you remember, I told you was the oldest of the lighthouse keepers, the one who'd spent 14 months living on the island just to get himself ready for the conditions, he noted that his other two fellow lighthouse keepers were very, very quiet. Those were his exact words in the logbook. This was followed by a description of the youngest of the keepers, the one who I told you was 28 years old. And he was documented as crying constantly. The very final entry in the logbooks, again written by the eldest keeper, James, simply says these words: "The sea is calm. God is over all." Okay, what's that about? God is over all. Those 4 words were the last words ever written by any of those lighthouse keepers before they vanished. As word begins to spread that the 3 lighthouse keepers have vanished, people start coming forward and saying they've noticed sometimes that the lights hadn't always been on, or that when ships were passing, odd things were happening at the lighthouse, like sometimes it was flashing when it shouldn't have been flashing for no reason. All this does is it adds to the mystery. So what the hell happened? Where the hell did these men go? Detective Moorhead had this to say after his investigation. He said, "This is baffling, but I can assure you of one thing. Men do not simply vanish." So Moorhead, under a bit of pressure, because at this point, obviously this is bizarre, 3 men have just completely vanished. People want to know why, the public want to know why, the Lighthouse Board, they want to know why. He just, under pressure, says, okay, it was the weather. He says, high winds have blown the men off of the island. That's the reason that they vanished. It's pure and simple. However, in the months later, when he concluded his interview, he had changed his mind entirely. He stated, "I said that because I needed an answer. But when I looked at those weather conditions, yes, it was windy, but the way the wind was blowing, that wouldn't have caused this." He said even if the elements had caught these men off guard, they would have been able to reach out to safety. So the idea that it was ever weather or a storm was completely ruled out. But of course, ruling that out only adds to more suspicion and to more mystery. Now, the theories, oh my god, they are wide-ranging, and in some cases, they are just bizarre. You can imagine, you've got aliens, you've got someone arrived and kidnapped them, you've got, oh my god, if you went into this, the theories go on forever. There's a couple of theories that I do think are quite interesting that might be worth pondering. So one of them suggests that the men had suffered some sort of collective madness and that they had jumped from the island into the sea. I'm not sure if that's the answer, but you know that I love a bit of collective madness, so I'm inclined to be drawn to that one. Isolation sickness is another theory, and it really, to this day, it actually stands to be the most popular and kind of most reliable about what might have happened here. Isolation theory is when people are suffering from being isolated, and what actually happens is a sort of madness takes over them from being constantly in a situation where they feel alone, or where they feel that they are just disconnected from the world, from everything. Even though they're working with two other people, they feel like they're just so completely removed from everything that it turns to some kind of madness, and that turns to some kind of action. So within the isolation sickness idea, the isolation theory is that one of the men may have turned on the other two, possibly killed them, and then killed himself. And on a side note, this did actually happen somewhere else on a Scottish island with a lighthouse in the 1960s. An assistant lighthouse keeper snapped while he was waiting for a relief ship, and he shot his fellow lighthouse keeper in frustration and anger. And later, in court, when asked what had happened, he said, "It was isolation. I just could not cope anymore, and that's why I fired the shot." So, it can happen. After months and months of extensive investigation, the Lighthouse Board issued a statement to say that they were in no doubt that the weather conditions were the cause of the men's disappearance. They stated it had to be the case. That had to be what happened. The men were swept off the island. The Weather Board, in response, came back and said, "You're wrong. The weather on the day of their disappearance was clear with a slight storm. It was nowhere near bad enough to sweep bodies from that island. If they had fallen into the sea, why were no bodies ever recovered? No bodies were ever seen again?" So the detective Moorhead, he disagreed with all of these findings. He felt strongly that blaming the weather was the wrong thing to do. He said, and I agree with what he's got to say here. I'm on the side of his theory. He says, no man on an island goes out in bad weather, let alone an experienced lighthouse keeper. He knows better. He goes on to say, if these men were in trouble, they could have signalled to land. Why didn't they? Something stopped them. Who or what stopped them from raising the alarm? He asked once more, why were all of the clocks in the lighthouse stopped at the exact same time? Why were the men's jackets left behind? And he concluded with the same statement he began this whole investigation with. He said, men do not simply vanish. And so ends the story of the lighthouse keepers of Eilean Mor. Okay, that was story 1. Well, I hope you enjoyed it. Story 2. Okay, let's go. Story 2 is to do with the Scottish tradition of first footing. Now, it's a tradition that's as old as the hills. It's gone on for years. To be honest, I don't know if people still do it. I don't really think so. I think it's quite old now. I don't know, maybe in some parts of Scotland people will still do it. I think there's versions of it in other countries. I'm pretty sure there are. I think there's a version of it in Spain. I don't know if there's a version. I've got a weird feeling there's a version of it in America, but I can't quite think what it's called. Anyway, this is what first footing is. So you'll know, obviously New Year is a big massive deal in every country. Bringing in the new year, it's a huge thing. So in Scotland, Hogmanay, which is the 31st of December, is a huge deal. It's way too big a deal, to be honest. It just becomes a massive stress for everybody. New Year for every Scottish person is just stressful, because Hogmanay gets built up to be this kind of big thing that you know, it needs to be your best night out of the year, and it never is. It never is, because you're always trying to please everybody, do everything, and anyway, it just all becomes a bit of a nightmare. But anyway, first footing is an old Hogmanay tradition in which what you would do is you would arm yourself with a few things, and you would go round the houses in your village, in your street, and you would be the first foot to pass through the door of your neighbour, of your person, few people down the street. So after the bells ring, you want to be that person that passes through your neighbour's door. And what you would bring with you is you would bring a coin, you would bring whiskey, you would bring possibly a piece of coal, and possibly some bread. Now, the reason you bring these things is because a coin was meant to ensure that the house you were coming into would be prosperous in the year ahead. You were bringing whiskey because it was believed that bringing whiskey meant the house would be filled with alcohol and fun. Bread, meaning the house would never go hungry. And coal, meaning the house would never go cold. Like I say, it is quite an old tradition. I remember it from when I was like maybe 8 or 9 and being at my gran's for like Hogmanay. You would get a first footer coming through the door, and everyone had to jump up and make a big deal about the first footer coming through the door. But when you're 9 years old, you're like, I don't really care if this man's brought some coal and some bread. Like, well, I'm 9 and who gives a fuck? But anyway, that's the tradition. So, the story I'm going to tell you happened in 1966, and it concerns 3 brothers called Cleghorn. So these 3 brothers, they lived in the Govan area of Glasgow, and they lived with their parents, and Hogmanay has arrived. So keeping with family tradition, the family ring in the bells together at midnight, and then they all do their own thing. Now this means that the 3 sons, they go out first footing, while the parents stay at home and they wait for the first footer to arrive through their door. So it's big party time. Every house in the street is having a party. You're accepting people through your door. Those people are coming through, they're having a drink, they're moving on to the next house down the road. You know, it's just a big party, that's all it is. So the sons go off, the three of them, and they're armed with their whiskey, their coins, their biscuits they had, actually. Not bread, they had biscuits, and their coal. So they make their way down Govan Road, and it's a fairly large street that runs through Glasgow. And they stop at a few houses to celebrate the new year. They have a drink, or a swally, as it might be known. There's been some chat on the Facebook group about Scottish words, so I thought I'll introduce this one, because it's in the context of the story. A swally means having a drink. So in context, I might say, I'm going to meet my friends tonight, and we're going for a wee swally, which means I'm meeting my pals, and we'll probably get drunk, is exactly what it means. So back to the three brothers. They're going house to house, when the two eldest brothers realise that the 19-year-old youngest brother, Alex, he isn't with them. So where is he? Well, they don't know. So they continue on their journey of the houses, and they're drinking as they go, and around about 3 a.m, they head back to their parents' house. And when they get back, their mother immediately asks, "Where is Alex?" To which they reply, "Don't know. He was with us, but perhaps he met some friends, or he decided to stay in a particular house." So their mum and dad are of course worried and angry that the two elder brothers have come home without their younger sibling. So the mother, and this is quoted, she says, "Get your arse back out there and drag him home by his ear if you have to." So the brothers, they go to look. They retrace the houses that they'd been in, but no one has seen him. That goes on for hours. They search every house that they had been at, but as the sun begins to rise, they head home to their parents with the news that they cannot find their brother. So police are called immediately. Now, given what I've told you about Hogmanay in Scotland, police will always say Hogmanay is their busiest time of the year. The crowds, the drunks, the alcohol, the fights that break out, the general craziness that takes over, police have to be on hand. They are out en masse in Hogmanay. So when they are told that Alex, 19 years old, hasn't come home, they don't take it too seriously. They think, yeah, he's 19, it's party time. He's probably just got drunk somewhere and now he's sleeping it off. The next day comes and Alex doesn't come home. So the brothers on the 2nd of January, they go out and they retrace their steps. Once more they go to every house that they had been at. They walk up and down every street that they had been up and down, but nothing turns up. Days pass and no sign of Alex. Months pass and no sign of Alex. Years pass and no sign of Alex. It's 2018. This happened in 1966. It's been 52 years and there has never been a single sign of Alex. No body, no clothing, not one stitch of evidence. So this case remains one of Scotland's strangest disappearances. The story of Alex divided people, and it divided his family. Some believed a terrible, terrible accident had occurred, and that possibly he had been run over and that the body might have been disposed of. Some believed he might have fallen into the nearby River Clyde. The River Clyde's like the biggest river that runs through Glasgow. But no body was ever found. Some in the family believe that the elder brothers knew way more than they were ever saying about his disappearance. But nothing could ever be proven. His poor parents died, not ever knowing what happened to their son, the son that they sent out at 19 years old on a Hogmanay, who never came back. And I can't even imagine how horrific that must have been. Both of his brothers have now passed away, and any chance of ever finding Alex or of ever discovering what the hell happened on that night is gone. And so ends the story of Alex, the first footer. Okay, the final story. The disappearance of singer Sheila MacDonald. Okay, where are we and what time is it? It's Edinburgh. It's 1972. That's where this story takes place. Young singer-songwriter Sheila MacDonald. I mean, could she sound any more Scottish? Sheila MacDonald. She's been born to wealthy Edinburgh parents. She was musical from a young age, although this is something her parents didn't really like. They wanted her to get a proper job. Oh, that old story, come on. It is a proper job. Now, it's said that when she sang, she sounded like Joni Mitchell, one of my favourites. Sheila's parents were devout Christian Scientists, and they felt strongly that Sheila needed to consider another type of career. So in the late 60s, barely 20 years old, she travelled to Bristol in England. Now, Bristol is somewhere that's always had a reputation for a really thriving art scene. It still does to this day. It's one of the UK's most vibrant cities, and back in the 60s it was a place to be if you were a young musician, which Sheila was. So anyway, she goes to Bristol, and here she meets lots of musicians who become really interested in her voice. They love her sound, and they convince her, move to London, come to London and start making albums. So she gets a record contract, and off she goes. She's living in London. So, down to the fact that she had an absolutely stunning voice and the incredible songs that she was writing, Sheila quickly becomes known in the music press, and she is regarded really highly. Now, this shouldn't matter, and it doesn't matter, but Sheila was also a real beauty. Very, very attractive. And so this helped promote the whole entire package. Here was this singer who was not only in possession of a beautiful voice and an incredible songwriter, she was also absolutely beautiful, and so the music press swept her up. She was a real critic's favourite. She was named Voice of a Generation, and the Scottish siren with a voice to melt your heart. She released 2 major albums, one in 1970 and the other 1971. Both of these albums were huge successes, both commercially and critically. So at the beginning, and what would later be the height of Sheila's career, there came a day in April 1972 where Sheila walked out of her London flat. She locked the door and she vanished into thin air. The night before her disappearance, Sheila had been at a party with some fellow musicians. And it was a crowd of people that she would, it was the kind of people she would normally hang out with. It was the sort of music people, it was the music scene. And these are the people that she would often be out with. So her manager at the time, having not heard from her in a couple of days, was frantically trying to get hold of her. He was contacting friends, everyone she worked with, and although he knew that Sheila's parents were not particularly on her side in terms of music, he eventually gave in and contacted her parents. They had no idea where she was. There was no sign of her anywhere, nothing. No one had a single clue where Sheila MacDonald had gone. A police search turned up, nothing. An independent search by the family turned up, fucking nothing. Until this. A newspaper in Scotland ran a feature on the disappearance of Sheila MacDonald 30 years after it happened. So that would be 2002. So in 2002, a newspaper runs this article. They run this feature on the strange, baffling disappearance of Sheila. Someone at the height of their recording success. Where had she gone? Someone in their heyday, having their moment. Where was she? Now, the newspaper running this article had no idea what was about to happen. The man who had written the article was sitting at his desk when he's told that a woman has arrived. She's in reception and she wants to talk to him without any appointment. So he says, okay, who is it? And he's given the answer. She says her name is Sheila MacDonald. What the fuck? So of course he's like, bring her in. If she says she's Sheila MacDonald, she might be a crazy. She might just be an absolute, what was that lovely word that someone on Instagram described one of the stories? Like, oh, she might be a wackadoodle. I mean, she might be a wackadoodle. Who knows? But it could be her. Turns out, this is her. This is now the 52-year-old Sheila. She had seen the article about her own disappearance, and she decided that she wanted to talk to the man who'd written the article. Okay, I'm putting myself in the position of that man. If I'm that man, what's question 1 going to be? What would you want to ask? Put yourself in that position. I think for me it would be, what the hell has happened here? Where have you been? What the hell is going on? Luckily for this man, Sheila explains it all. The night before her disappearance, she had been at a party, as I'd said, and she had taken acid, LSD. She explained, "I thought it would be out of my system within 12 hours, but 3 weeks later I was still hallucinating. I was walking around the shops and I was looking at people who had no eyes, no features. Their faces were blank. I had forgotten to eat. I was just skin and bone." So after that incredibly bad acid trip, fearing for her life, Sheila returned to her parents. And what they did was they quickly settled her into a suburban lifestyle. She took on a job working in an Edinburgh department store under a false name. Sheila's voice was wrecked. Drugs had absolutely wrecked her vocal cords. She went on to explain to the journalist that somewhere in the 1980s, when living with her parents and living this kind of 9 to 5 and working in an Edinburgh department store life, she decided she'd had enough of that. So she fled the situation. She left. She met a man who owned a bookshop in London. They sold the bookshop and they spent 7 years living in the Scottish Islands in a tent. Essentially just being homeless, having no fixed residence. They couldn't be traced. No one could track down Sheila. So in the 80s, she had no contact with the outside world. And it was only when she split up from her partner that she returned to Edinburgh to realise that her parents were dead. Her parents died not knowing where Sheila was. Having once saved her from wandering the streets when she was only 20 from a bad trip on acid, they died not knowing what she'd ever done with the rest of her life. Sheila MacDonald is still alive, and only a few months ago she played a gig in London. And so ends the story of Sheila MacDonald. Okay, wow. 3 stories for you there. I hope you enjoyed them. So before I go, I just wanted to address something which has come up in a few emails now. I've received some social media stuff, and actually, to my face, I've also received this from people, and that is to do with the music that I use in the podcast. Now, you might have heard me say early on, you might have heard me wanging on about the fact that I created the music for the podcast from scratch. So I did that using samples. I got some different programs to edit stuff together. I used different sounds, and that's how I created both the intro and the outro. Now, Shouty Man, he causes issues. Some people hate Shouty Man. I mean, I've had people coming at me and saying, "I love the podcast, but I can't sleep because of Shouty Man." And they won't listen because... And I've considered this, like, back and forth. I've like, should I fade them out? Should I get rid of them? Or what will I do? And for a couple of episodes, you may remember, I got rid of Shouty Man. What I did was I just used a wee bit of the intro that was maybe less in your face, in your ears, in your whatever. But then, you know, I've been through a bit of a process with this, and you know what, I'm back to deciding. Shouty Man's back. I'm going to reinstate him. He's back to stay. If you don't like it, skip it. It's not hard. Do you know what I mean? Everybody's got the button where you can skip for 15 seconds. Fucking skip Shouty Man if you don't like it at the very beginning of the episode. I'm sorry. That's my response to that. Okay? So, just wanted to address the amount of people coming at me and going, "Yeah, love the podcast, think it's absolutely brilliant, just can't stand the man screaming." Well, skip it. Okay? That's my opinion. But I also wanted to talk to you about, because this has I've had this question a few times, so just thought I'd answer it. The man at the end, so the man who talks. It didn't really affect me one little bit. I'd say from the look on his face, let's get on, let's get over with. So I got the question from Xander Fredzolo on email. He said, who is the guy at the end? Is this you putting on a voice? No, Xander, it is not. I will tell you exactly who this is. That guy is the first man who was ever interviewed having witnessed Ted Bundy's execution. So he was a detective who'd worked on some of the really early Bundy murders, and he was allowed to watch the execution. So the first question he's asked is, how did it make you feel? The second question he's asked is, how did Ted Bundy look? So I took from that interview the two things that man says, and then I built the music around it. So I hope that clears up the music stuff. So to just sum it up, Shouty Man's not going anywhere. That's what the outro music means. Alright, I've babbled on enough. As always, thank you for listening, and thank you for supporting. If you want to donate to Patreon, I would be beyond fucking grateful for that. I honestly can't believe people giving money on Patreon. I'm so grateful for it. Thank you. If you want to find me, I'm on Twitter, I'm on Instagram, there's the Facebook group. Get in touch, okay? That's all from me. I'm off for a wee swally, okay? Goodbye. Oh no, hang on. That's not all from me. I started a thread on the Facebook group about high profile cases where someone is clearly guilty but has either escaped or the case has been spun and it's so obvious that the person is guilty. So your Michael Petersons, your Casey Anthonys, I've already talked about the Menendez brothers, but you know, those kind of people. You get the idea. So if you've got an example, please let me know. Please get in touch, because I really want to look at these stories. I really want to, anyway, I'm under an investigation with these things and I really want to know about them. So yeah, I think that might finally be it from me. Let me just check. Yes, nothing else in my notes. Okay? Goodbye.
It didn't affect me really one way or the other. I would imagine from the look on his face. Let's get it on. Let's do it. Let's get it over.